Hello and welcome to the No One Asked You podcast. I'm reading The Wheel of Time for the first time and sharing the experience with you. This is One Good Turn, The Eye of the World, and today I am covering Chapter 9! He made it, guys! He actually did. He woke up, they got the conversation. Rand, you didn't ask the question. Why? Okay. We get a dream sequence and a very long lore drop from Moraine. Lots of stuff that happens this chapter, much of it probably going over my head, but I'll try and get through my experience with it, if not all of the specifics, because if I took the time to read out every single thing that I thought was important, I'd get pretty much the whole chapter. We start in what is clearly a dream sequence, and coming off the heels of Moraine's comment about nightmares in the previous chapter, it seems fairly obvious to me going in that this is going to be a nightmare, or nightmare-ish, or something to that effect. Also, at this point I'm wondering, is it supposed to be a mystery which of them is the Dragon Reborn? Because it feels really darn confirmed in this particular chapter. So, for whatever that's worth, Rand is running. He feels like he's being chased. He's in barren hills on a hot day in summer. He keeps running. He's looking over his shoulder, but he can't actually see his pursuers. He's able to hear them, though. And he gets to the top of a knife-edged ridge and drops to his knees with a groan because there's a 1,000-foot cliff plummeting into a vast canyon. Lots of setting description. You kind of get the sense that this is Mordor. Or, in this book, I guess it might be called Shia Ghul. There's a big mountain, and every time I hear mountain, I also have to think about the mountain that Lews Therin created when he blew up. I guess it could make sense that if there's a bad mountain, there's also a good mountain. Presumably, the mountain that the Dark One is imprisoned in preceded Lews Therin's mountain, which makes me wonder if the mountain that he created ends up becoming Emond's Field and the Misty Mountain, though I'm not so sure that's the case. He feels a lot of things as he's looking at the mountain. There's an important line. He had never seen it before, but he knew it. The memory of it flashed away like quicksilver when he tried to touch it, but the memory was there. He knew it was there. And that more or less confirms to me that Rand is the Dragon Reborn. Almost certainly, I would imagine. He's staring up at it, and we get another important piece of information. Tears ran down his face, and he sagged to the ground. He felt his will draining like water out of a holed bucket. Just a little longer, and he would go where he was called. He would obey, do as he was told. Before I get to the next part, first off, that does sound an awful lot like Ruin and the Inquisitors, but that's not why I brought this passage up. The passage goes on to say, push him and pull him. He was not a sheep to be prodded into a pen. The anger squeezed itself into one hard knot, and he clung to it as he would have clung to a raft in a flood. I saw anger, and of course my mind goes to anger leads to hate, hate leads to the dark side, whatever that particular quote was. One would think to associate anger with the Dark One, not something to be necessarily be used against the Dark One. But then I think, well, righteous anger, righteous fury, in some ways, I suppose anger can be used virtuously. And as long as it's not unbridled rage, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that Rand is capable of feeling such anger. You certainly don't want to necessarily deny yourself that. I've heard it said that anger is not a real emotion, that anger is the spawn of three emotions. I think fear, jealousy, and I always forget the third. Anyway, that's a tangent right there. He starts hearing a voice. Again, I'm thinking of Ruin as I go through this. Serve me, a voice whispered in the stillness of his mind, a familiar voice. He listened hard enough he was sure he would know it. "Serve me!" He shook his head to try to get it out of his head. "Serve me!" He shook his fist at the black mountain. "The light consume you, Shaitan!" I had wondered in a previous chapter, 1, about whether or not destroying the Dragon Reborn isn't the victory, but swaying him to your side is. So it does not surprise me that the Dark One is trying to convert Rand. I do wonder how much of it is that counterstroke, and because the wheel was tainted, or the power was tainted, the male half of the power was tainted. But then I see the word consume, and sort of going on my earlier tangent about anger being used for good, consume suggests to me some sort of carnivorous or predatory intimation or idea, but it's the light swirling around thoughts. The smell of death lays thick about him, and suddenly he's no longer in that barren land. He's not falling, he's in a beautiful place with grass and trees and bushes and a gently rolling plain. There's a single mountain, its peak broken and split, but this mountain brought no fear or despair. It was just a mountain, though oddly out of place there, with no other in sight. And that's the mountain that I think may well have been created by Lews Therin Telamon. Maybe. But here's the thing. Later on, he's in some sort of vision that I think is supposed to be of his time as Lews Therin. And obviously the mountain did not precede Lews Therin. It came after, because of. So, as we get to a description of the city that's there, a broad river flowed by the mountain, and on an island in the middle of that river was a city, such as might live in a gleeman's tale, a city surrounded by high walls gleaming white and silver beneath the warm sun. With mingled relief and joy he started for the walls for the safety and serenity he somehow knew he would find behind them. I wondered if this is Tar Valon at this point, which is possible. The other thing, though, is, well, I'll get to that when we actually get into that particular part of the chapter. He goes into the city. Beyond those bridges lay safety, sanctuary. Of a sudden, a chill ran along his bones, an icy clamminess settled on his skin, and the air around him turned fetid and dank. Without looking back, he ran from the pursuer whose freezing fingers brushed his back and tugged at his cloak, ran from the light-eating figure with the face that he could not remember the face except as terror. So he's running away from the dark to the light, and he ends up on paving stones, presumably in the city, and there's smiling people walking all around him. They're singing, they're dancing, they're dressed in so many different colors that Rand thinks of wildflowers. And there's a tower, and he knows it is safe in the tower. So he starts to head toward it. Then we get to this segment. He joined the throng streaming against the bridge and into the city through massive gates set in tall, pristine walls. Within was a wonderland where the meanest structure seemed a palace. It was as though the builders had been told to take stone and brick and tile and create beauty to take the breath of mortal men. I did bring up at one point my suspicion that Lews Therin perhaps committed an act of hubris, which ended up allowing for the Dark One's counterstroke. I wonder if it involved his city. And again, at this point, I'm kind of wondering if this is that city that he created, because there is something wonderful and beautiful, but also slightly off. Again, this is also a nightmare, though, or a dream. So it's really, really hard to say. So much of this is purposefully ambiguous. He's going through the city towards the tower, and there's a particularly dangerous segment, and I wrote out in my notes, no! That tower was where safety lay, and the knowledge he sought, but the city was such as he had never dreamed of seeing. Surely it would not matter if he delayed just a short time in going to the tower. He turned aside onto a narrow street where jugglers strolled among hawkers of strange fruits. Yeah, don't get distracted, Rand. Don't. Go get the knowledge you need. So, at this point, he seems to have forsaken his duty or his destiny. He's being distracted, and this reflects in the people around him. The faces around him were still friendly, but shattered hope filled them now, hope he had broken. Still, the people gestured him forward, pleading gestures toward the tower. Their eyes shone with desperate need, and only he could fulfill it. Only he could save them. Very well, he thought. The tower was, after all, where he wanted to go. So they all need him. He is their savior. And as soon as he goes, all of that false hope goes away, that desperation goes away, and they are genuinely smiling again. He is on the right path again. There are flowers on the street, and he's wondering who they're for. But then he thinks, they must be for me, and wondered why that suddenly did not seem strange at all. But wonderment lasted only a moment before melting away. All was as it should be. And I'm wondering how much of this is his thoughts versus how much of this is Lews Therin's thoughts, because I do kind of think that this might be Lews Therin. Like, I imagine if he looked in a mirror, he might see Lews Therin rather than himself. I guess, arguably, they are the same. They are one and the same, but also not. It's annoying to me not to have a straight answer on that kind of thing, but it's fine. It's not bad. At some point, he starts dancing. He threw back his head and laughed. His feet were lighter than they had ever been, dancing with... He could not remember the name, but it did not seem important. I think the name is Ilyena? Maybe? I've said it before. As I was going through this, I was thinking it was Lews Therin. But then he hears, "It is your destiny," a voice whispered in his head, and the whisper was a thread in the pain. "Your destiny," the voice whispered, insistent, now eager. And that eagerness had me presume that this is all false. I don't think goodness, light, would be eager. The eager seems much more like a Dark One word. He wants you to get to the tower so that he can feast, kind of a thing. Anyway, he no longer danced, but neither did he stop. He mounted the stairs without hesitation. This was where he belonged. Scrollwork covered the massive doors at the top of the stairs, carvings so intricate and delicate that he could not imagine a knife blade fine enough to fit. The portals swung open and he went in. They closed behind him with an echoing crash like thunder. "We have been waiting for you," the Murdral hissed. I wonder how much of that, first off, is he infected? Is he tainted? Did the Murdral control that entire experience? Was he making it look pretty? I don't know. As far as my skill set goes, I don't think my strength lies in dream interpretations when it comes to books. I really like the way Gurm utilizes dreams in Game of Thrones, and I've listened to videos about, like, Dany's visions in the tower, but on my own, when it comes to this kind of sequence, I don't think I'm at my strongest. So I just enjoy the ride and the face value elements at play. Rand wakes up, and I'm hoping immediately that, like, one of the first things that he's going to want to do is go straight to Moraine and be like, "Hey, I had a dream. You mentioned nightmares, so let's talk about it." But he doesn't. Obviously, there are some other concerns first, but it's like, you should see someone about that. He fears the possibility that saying the Dark One's name in a dream is equivalent to saying it in real life. And, I'm not sure it matters, because the Dark One's going to have his eyes on you regardless of whether or not you say his name. So he slept the day away. Obviously, he needed it. And then this passage I highlighted, he rubbed a sore spot on his side. Apparently, he had slept with the sword hilt jabbing him in the ribs. It's a very specific line. I wonder if it represents the taint within him, some sort of self-inflicted wound, some sort of possible danger. Again, in that dream, he got distracted. He avoided going to the tower. I can't tell right now if that was for the better or the worse, considering I can't tell if the dream was orchestrated by the Murdral entirely or not entirely. But there does seem to be some sort of connection there, such that I felt it important to highlight. his dad's asleep, so he goes and gets some of the food that Mistress Alvir had left for him. Broth, bread, cheese, delicious. When Rand touched his father's forehead, Tam opened his eyes. And I wrote, yay, good, we're gonna get the conversation. I did not think we would. Not that he asked the question I wanted him to, but at least they got to have their goodbye. It would have been so much of a bummer if he didn't. There you are, boy. Marin said you were here, but I couldn't even sit up to see. She said you were too tired for her to wake just so I could look at you. Even Bran can't get around her when she has her mind set. And I read that the first time, and I was, almost mad. And it's because I couldn't tell if she refused to wake him because he needed his sleep, or that she tried to wake him but couldn't because he needed his sleep. Because if I were Rand in that situation, I'm like, I don't care how you do it. You wake me up to speak to Dad. Tam's already eaten, broth specifically. Tam asks for an update on the farm, which he gets. And then he told Tam everything that had happened, or at least most of it. Tam listened closely and asked sharp questions, so he found himself having to tell about returning to the farmhouse from the woods, and that brought in the Trolloc he had killed. He had to tell how Nynaeve had said Tam was dying to explain why the Aes Sedai had tended him instead of the Wisdom. Tam's eyes widened at that. An Aes Sedai in Emond's Field, but Rand could see no need to go over every step of the journey from the farm, or his fears, or the Myrddraal on the road. Certainly not his nightmares as he slept by the bed. Especially he saw no reason to mention Tam's ramblings under the fever. Not yet. Moiraine's story, though, there was no avoiding that. So, I want him to tell everything. I'm concerned he's not going to tell anyone about the dreams, including Moiraine, but fine. But he is going to tell Tam about the plan to leave, and I am in full support of this. I fear it's going to be bad for them in some way, but right now it feels like the smart decision to me. Tam seems smart, educated, responsible, and knows more than your average person. So, I support. Now that's a tale to make a Gleeman proud. What would Trollocs want with you boys? Or the Dark One, light help us? You think she was lying? Master Alvir said she was telling the truth about only 2 farms being attacked, and about Master Luhan's house and Master Cawthon's. For a moment Tam lay silent before saying, Tell me what she said, her exact words, mind, just as she said them. And I wrote there, he knows. He absolutely knows about the Aes Sedai. Specifically that they tend to word things in very specific ways. I get the sense he's had some dealings with them before, perhaps. Rand struggled. Whoever remembered the exact words they heard? He chewed at his lip and scratched his head, and bit by bit he brought it out as nearly as he could remember. And then when Rand is worried that he doesn't get it 100% right, but pretty darn close, Tam says, It's good enough. It has to be, doesn't it? You see, lad, Aes Sedai are tricksome. They don't lie, not right out. But the truth an Aes Sedai tells you is not always the truth you think it is. You take care around her. Tam says that he should go with, it's dangerous and the world outside 2 Rivers is very different. And then we get, that was an opening to ask about Tam going outside and all the rest of it. But Rand did not take it. There will never be, I hope there will be another opportunity, but really, when, Rand, will you have the opportunity to ask that question? When will you have the opportunity to hear it specifically from him? You know you're about to go on a dangerous adventure. Yeah, your dad may be fine by the time you get back, but you don't know how many days, weeks, months, years it could be until you get back. It is a dangerous world. There's war about. You do not want this hanging over your head, Rand. Ask him. But instead he says, I thought you would try to talk me out of it. I thought you'd have 100 reasons I should not go. Maybe not 100, but a few did come to mind. Only they don't count for much. If Trollocs are after you, you will be safer in Tar Valon than you could ever be here. Just remember to be wary. Aes Sedai do things for their own reasons, and those are not always the reasons you think. You listen sharp, think deep, and guard your tongue. That's good advice for any dealings beyond the two rivers, but most especially with Aes Sedai, and with warders. Tell Lan something, and you've as good as told Moraine. If he's a warder, then he's bonded to her as sure as the sun rose this morning, and he won't keep many secrets from her, if any. So now we know that warders are bonded to Aes Sedai, possibly specific Aes Sedai, which is good to know. We get some information. Essentially, they get all sorts of benefits by being bonded: extended lifespan, health, less food or water needed, things like that. I'll be careful. I just wish I knew why. It doesn't make any sense. Why me? Why us? I wish I knew too, boy. Blood and ashes, I wish I knew. So Tam, I think, intends to go with, which is great. He says he'll be back on his feet in a day or two, and asks when they plan to leave, and Rand dodges the question by saying that he's supposed to be in bed for weeks. But of course, Tam catches on to that fact right away. The way you avoided answering means you have to leave soon. Tomorrow or tonight? Tonight. Yes, well, if it must be done, best not to delay. But we will see about this week's business. Perhaps I'll follow in a few days anyway. Catch you up on the road. We will see if Meryn can keep me in bed when I want to get up. And then Lan sticks his head in and says to say your goodbyes because there's trouble afoot, and they need to go quickly. So, one thing is, I really did love that exchange between Rand and Tam. There was something really nice about it. There was something really wholesome about it. I felt a lot of love between the two, and a lot of pragmaticness from Tam, and I always appreciate a good pragmatic character. I do hope he'll be able to catch up, but I don't think that's going to happen. Tam tells him to keep the sword, though he hopes he won't have to use it. And also, as soon as we hear there's trouble, I presume it's the town. I don't think it's another Trolloc attack by any means. Rand takes a moment to try and ask the question, or rather to find the right words to ask the question, but Lan hurries them up. Again, they meet up with Mat. No sign of Perrin yet that I'm aware of. No sign of Egwene or Nynaeve joining them either, so I'm still waiting on that mystery. I want to see how they get roped into this. And then they head toward Moraine, which is obviously where the source of the trouble is going to be. At first he was not sure exactly what he was seeing. A crowd of village men, some 36 or so, clustered near the burned-out husk of the peddler's wagon, night pushed back by the torches some of them carried. Moraine faced them, her back to the inn, leaning with seeming casualness on her walking staff. Hari Copeland stood in front of the crowd with his brother Darl and Billy Congar. Sen Buie was there as well, looking uncomfortable. There are some characters here that are mentioned who, even before the lore drop, even before story time, look uncomfortable, and I can appreciate that. But essentially, the mob is here to kick the Aes Sedai out. I get the sense that she could take them all on if she had to, as if they could actually cause some sort of problem to her. Nevertheless, they are trying to protect their town. They're telling her to get out. The mayor and Luhan make their way out and try to shame some of the mob and side with Moraine, which I think is really good. I'm curious where Nynaeve would be in this. If she would be on the pro-Moraine side or the pro-mob side. Very curious. The mayor tries to talk it out. It's fairly general mob stuff, but the mob is intent to blame the Aes Sedai even if she did help. They think that the Trollocs were there because of her. And then Moraine casts some sort of spell with her staff. Moraine suddenly whirled her vine-carved staff above her head, spinning it with both hands. Rand's gasp echoed that of the villagers, for a hissing white flame flared from each end of the staff, standing straight out like spear points despite the rods whirling. Even Bran and Harl edged away from her. She snapped her arms down straight out before her, the staff parallel to the ground, but the pale fire still jetted out, brighter than the torches. Men shied away, held up hands to shield their eyes from the pain of that brilliance. And then she gets into a lecture, and we get the history of of the two rivers. Is this what Aemon's blood has come to? Little people squabbling for the right to hide like rabbits? You have forgotten who you were, forgotten what you were. But I had hoped some small part was left, some memory in blood and bone, some shred to steel you for the long night coming. So she starts off by trying to shame them. Certainly earned, this particular mob, at least. To the south lies the river you call the White River, but far to the east of here men call it still by its rightful name, Manatharandrel, in the old tongue, waters of the mountain home. Sparkling waters that once coursed through a land of bravery and beauty. 2,000 years ago, Manatharandrel flowed by the walls of a mountain city so lovely to behold that Ogier stonemasons came to stare in wonder. Farms and villages covered this region, and that you call the Forest of Shadows as well, and beyond. But all of those folk thought of themselves as the people of the mountain home, the people of Manatharan. So at this point, I'm wondering if what we saw in the dream was Manatharan, rather than Tor Valon. And then I have to wonder if Manatharan is the city that Lews Therin lived in, where the palace was that he ended up betraying his family. But then again, they have a king who isn't Lews Therin, so maybe not. I guess technically the dragon isn't a king, so maybe not. Their king was Aemon Alcar Althorin. Aemon, son of Car, son of Thorin, and Eldrine Ielan Icarlin was his queen. Aemon, a man so fearless that the greatest compliment for courage any could give, even among his enemies, was to say a man had Aemon's heart. Eldrine, so beautiful that it was said the flowers bloomed to make her smile, bravery and beauty and wisdom, and a love that death could not sunder. Weep if you have a heart for the loss of them, for the loss of even their memory. Weep for the loss of their blood. There's a lot of very flowery language going on in this story that she is telling. Admittedly, there is a part of me that feels like this story goes on for a really long time. We still have a ways to go through it, but it is certainly interesting and I expect will be important information to know. Obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be here. For nearly 2 centuries, the Trolloc War had ravaged the length and breadth of the world, and wherever battles raged, the Red Eagle banner of Manatharan was in the forefront. The men of Manatharan were a thorn to the Dark One's foot and a bramble to his hand. Sing of Manatharan that would never bend the knee to the shadow. Sing of Manatharan, the sword that could not be broken. They were far away, men of Manatharan, on the field of Bekar, called the Field of Blood, when news came that a Trolloc army was moving against their home. Too far to do else but wait to hear of their land's death, for the forces of the Dark One meant to make an end of them. Kill the mighty oak by hacking away its roots. Too far to do else but mourn. But they were the men of Mountain Home. This place has a tremendous amount of hardiness to its people, to its king, to its queen. Without hesitation, without thought for the distance they must travel, they marched from the very field of victory still covered in dust and sweat and blood. Day and night they marched, for they had seen the horror a Trolloc army left behind it, and no man of them could sleep while such a danger threatened Manatharan. They moved as if their feet had wings, marching further and faster than friends hoped or enemies feared they could. At any other day that march alone would have inspired songs. When the Dark One's army swooped down upon the lands of Manatharan, the men of the Mountain Home stood before it, with their backs to the Tarandral. Soldiers, excellent soldiers, doing their duty, really glorifying them here. With a purpose. The host that faced the men of Manatharan was enough to daunt the bravest heart. Ravens blackened the sky. Ravens, Dark One! Trollocs blackened the land. Trollocs and their human allies. Human allies, important to note, so there are going to be humans that side with the Dark One, willingly. Naturally, I mean, the Forsaken were Aes Sedai. I guess knowing that Myrddraal are like part human, I guess I kind of imagined that as soon as you, for the most part, as soon as you start following the Dark One, you become a Trolloc type thing, not all at once, naturally. Trollocs and dark friends in tens of thousands and dreadlords to command. At night their cook fires outnumbered the stars, and dawn revealed the banner of Baal-Zaman at their head. Baal-Zaman, Heart of the Dark, an ancient name for the Father of Lies. So I read that and I was like, oh shit, so did she actually say the name? Or is this just another title? Because surely it should still be just as dangerous to say the name, even if no one uses that name anymore. Heart of the Dark, an ancient name for the father of lies. The Dark One could not have been free of his prison at Shai Al Ghul, for if he had been, not all the forces of humankind together could have stood against him. But there was power there, dreadlords and some evil that made that light-destroying banner seem no more than right and sent a chill into the souls of the men who faced it. Yet they knew what they must do. Their homeland lay just across the river. They must keep that host and the power with it from the mountain home. Aemon had sent out messengers. Aid was promised if they could hold for but 3 days at the Tarandral. Hold for 3 days against odds that should overwhelm them in the first hour. Obviously, yet another Lord of the Rings comparison you think of, look for me on the 3rd day. Yet somehow, through bloody assault and desperate defense, they held through an hour, and the 2nd hour, and the 3rd. For 3 days they fought, and though the land became a butcher's yard, no crossing of the Tarandral did they yield. By the 3rd night, no help had come, and no messengers, and they fought on alone. For 6 days, for 9, and on the 10th day, Aemon knew the bitter taste of betrayal. No help was coming, and they could hold the river crossing no more. Still, considering an hour, 9 days is a hell of a lot. Good for them. And you do get the sense that this will turn to tragedy. Aemon crossed the Tarandral, destroying the bridges behind him, and he sent word throughout his land for the people to flee, for he knew the powers with the Trolloc Horde would find a way to bring it across the river. Even as the word went out, the Trolloc crossing began, and the soldiers of Manetheren took up the fight again, to buy with their lives what hours they could for their people to escape. From the city of Manetheren, Eldraine organized the flight of her people into the deepest forests and the fastness of the mountains. But some did not flee. First in a trickle, then a river, then a flood. Men went not to safety, but to join the army fighting for their land. Really hammering away at that guilt. Their ancestors, these people who were willing to fight nearly to the last man, to protect their home. Very awe-inspiring. Shepherds with bows and farmers with pitchforks and woodsmen with axes. Women went too, shouldering what weapons they could find and marching side by side with their men. No one made that journey who did not know they would never return. But it was their land, it had been their fathers', and it would be their children's, and they went to pay the price of it. Not a step of ground was given up until it was soaked in blood, but at the last the army of Manetheren was driven back to here, to this place you now call Emond's Field, and here the Trolloc hordes surrounded them. You almost think for a moment that they can make it. I wondered for a moment if this preceded Lews Therin, if this was a different age altogether, and if Aemon was the dragon, but I'm not convinced of that. Trolloc dead, and the corpses of human renegades piled up in mounds, but always more scrambled over those charnel heaps in waves of death that had no end. There could be but one finish. No man or woman who had stood beneath the banner of the Red Eagle at that day's dawning still lived when night fell. The sword that could not be broken was shattered. Everyone gone. Oof, to a man, to a woman. In the mountains of mist, alone in the emptied city of Manetheren, Eldraine felt Aemon die, and her heart died with him. And where her heart had been was left only a thirst for vengeance. Vengeance for her love. Vengeance for her people and her land. Driven by grief, she reached out to the true source and hurled the one power at the Trolloc army. So that's why I wondered if Aemon was a dragon reborn, because he was with someone, married with someone who could also access the power. But then it occurred to me, well, he didn't use the power, or maybe he was just like totally spent by the time it got that bad. 9 days, 10 days against too massive an army. Nevertheless, I don't think it's the case. I just wondered for a little while. And there the dreadlords died wherever they stood, whether in their secret councils or exhorting their soldiers. In the passing of a breath, the dreadlords and the generals of the Dark One's host burst into flame. Fire consumed their bodies, and terror consumed their just victorious army. Sounds like she detonated a nuke. I'm wondering if that mirroring is intentional. I mean, it has to be, right? Now they ran like beasts before a wildfire in the forest with no thought for anything but escape. North and south they fled. Thousands drowned attempting to cross the Tarandrel without the aid of the Dreadlords, and at the Mana Tharandrel they tore down the bridges in their fright at what might be following them. Where they found people they slew and burned, but to flee was the need that gripped them, until at last no one of them remained in the lands of Manatharan. They were dispersed like dust before the whirlwind. The final vengeance came more slowly, but it came. When they were hunted down by other peoples, by other armies in other lands, none was left alive of those who did murder at Amon's field. So that's great, but was it the people of Manatharan that hunted them down? Because if it's not, is it really vengeance? I'm not so sure. But the price was high for Manatharan. Eldrine had drawn to herself more of the one power that any human could ever hope to wield unaided. As the enemy generals died, so did she die, and the fires that consumed her consumed the empty city of Manatharan, even the stones of it down to the living rock of the mountains, yet the people had been saved. Nothing was left of their farms, their villages, or their great city. Some would say there was nothing left for them, nothing but to flee to other lands, where they could begin anew. They did not say so. They had paid such a price in blood and hope for their land as had never been paid before, and now they were bound to that soil by ties stronger than steel. Other wars would rack them in years to come, until at last their corner of the world was forgotten, and at last they had forgotten wars and the ways of war. Never again did Manatharan rise. Its soaring spires and splashing fountains became as a dream that slowly faded from the minds of its people. But they, and their children, and their children's children, held the land that was theirs. They held it when the long centuries had washed the why of it from their memories. They held it until, today, there is you. Weep for Manatharan. Weep for what is lost forever. So I can see how all of this is meant to shame them, but I'm not sure I see how it's supposed to indicate that Moraine isn't an evil Aes Sedai, or that what they're doing is wrong, other than that she's the one telling that story intended to shame them. Other than that, she's the one telling that story and reminding them of their heritage. She doesn't say, I've helped you here. She doesn't say, no, I came here because I was concerned something could happen, but you're confusing correlation with causation. Not that those arguments would have necessarily worked, but the story works. Pate Alcar says that she is welcome, that she helped his will walk again. So as far as he's concerned, she's always welcome. And slowly the crowd disperses. Lan rushes Rand along, telling him to move quickly. And then we get the moment in Lord of the Rings where Sam says, if I take one more step, Mr. Frodo, this will be the farthest I've ever traveled out of the Shire. While Moraine had been telling the story, Master Alvir's Durans could not have dragged him away, but now something else held his feet. And I'm pretty sure part of that was magic, not just the enrapturing story, but I think she was also charming them as well. But now something else held his feet. This was the real beginning, leaving the inn and following the warder into the night. He shook himself and tried to firm his resolve. He had no choice but to go, but he would come back to Emond's Field, however far or long this journey was. Trying to convince himself that he was beginning a grand adventure, Rand followed them through the darkened kitchen and out into the stable yard. A very epic end. You really feel like now we're getting into a different part of the book. I don't think this book does parts the way that Sanderson does, but you really do get the sense that this is the end of the beginning. So yeah, a lot of interesting information. I loved the Tam Rand stuff. I don't know what else there is to say. Exposition told in a somewhat interesting way. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks, bye.